What I want to talk about today is Terraform and what I've called Terraform in action. The reason why I've done that is what I kind of want to do is spend about the first 25%, 30% of the kind of talk actually kind of going through the concept of Terraform for those of you who may not have experienced it before, and then do my best to do as much of this as I can live. So hopefully it all works. Kind of a bit of breakdown as to how we're going to do this. So a little bit about kind of what is Terraform, kind of why it's referred to as IAC or infrastructure as code, if you've heard that terminology before. Providers, they're quite key to what we're going to be doing. What are they? Where do we get them from? How do I use them? What's the purpose? File structure, hey, what might I want to be using? How am I going to set up my Terraform configuration? And then kind of the most common commands. And then basically everything that we're going to do in that first section, we're going to do as much of that as we can live. So hopefully that will make sense for everyone. Kind of the point of this is I'm not going to go too deep. Hopefully by the end of this, you'll ideally understand a bit about what Terraform is and how you can use it or why you might want to use it, and then have enough knowledge that you can hopefully go away and start playing around by yourself and start to get the most out of it and experience it. Sound good? Cool, amazing. So what is Terraform? Terraform is not made by Jamf. We're not claiming we did it. It's a completely separate thing. It's a product made by HashiCorp. It's been around since, I think it was 2014, which was a couple of years before I kind of first had my first foray into it. And it's actually been acquired by IBM last year. I think it was March last year, so you'll probably turn around and see now, it will say it's an IBM company. If you actually go and see on HashiCorp's website or any of their kind of documentation around what it is, they will say it's an infrastructure as a code tool for provisioning resources, okay? And to go off and actually create and maintain those, create reusable configurations that you can version control and share with others, okay? And that's kind of why we're talking about it today. There are other applications within your organizations where you might already be using Terraform, or you might want to consider using it outside of kind of my use case that I'm going to show today. And that's kind of why I wanted to talk about it a little bit. So what do we need? Well, firstly, we need to install Terraform or use Terraform in some format. You can get it locally, install it that way. If you go off to HashiCorp, there's also Terraform Cloud, so you can do it as a SaaS tool as well if you needed to. And then the other thing we need to do is to write out what we call a configuration file, what we actually want it to do for us, okay? This is kind of a bit of a workflow that you're kind of going to see. If you were trying to adopt Terraform and use it, you would see a structure a bit like this. Hey, as an organization or as a company, we're probably going to work out what it is that we want our Terraform to do. We're going to work out our deployment architecture, and then we're going to go and write it into our configuration file, and then we're going to need to get it into whatever the environment it is that we're actually trying to use Terraform to configure for us. And that's kind of where then Terraform sits in that little bit between the configuration file and your environment. Okay? Make sense so far? Great, amazing. So I'm going to go through a bit of an example as to kind of why it's been referred to as IAC and kind of the previous use cases and still existing use cases that people would have maybe seen or can relate to understand how Terraform has been used historically. Imagine just for a minute, I don't work for Jamf. Maybe I work for a web development company, and I have different customers who I spin up web services for, okay? In this case, I'm going to spin up a web service for a ticket selling company. So I've got my Terraform. I've created my configuration files. I can then start to deploy something for them. Now, I might have several customers who have the same needs, okay? So I can actually use that same configuration file for multiple customers. That can be kind of my starting point. And a bit like a script, I don't have to have everything hard-coded into my configuration, into my Terraform, okay? So we can pass variables to it. So I can do something different for each of my customers. So in this case, I'm going to be spinning up a ticket selling service for whoever it is, whoever the customer is. And I can pass a variable to it saying, hey, for this customer, they want it to be hosted, in this case, in AWS EUS1, so the London data center, okay? That's where this customer wants it. A different customer, I can maybe pass a variable and say it needs to be in Germany, for example, or the US, all right? So I don't have to hard code that in. The other thing I can also do, maybe as a variable, is turn around and say the size of the web servers I'm actually going to use for them. So I can give it an instance type or an instance size. And that will then actually determine what my server size is going to be when I actually execute it for that customer. Likewise, in my configuration, I might also create a load balancer to split the traffic between my servers and then the database where actually things are going to get stored. Maybe my customer information or the user information is going to be. Likewise, I can then kind of add some more in, tell it how all of the different parts of the infrastructure then talk to each other, all the kind of things we might do in AWS. And so ultimately, when my end users then go to on their device and go to myticketsite.com, they'll hit the load balancer and then hit one of those web servers that's actually serving the solution for me, okay? Hopefully that kind of makes sense. This is why people have kind of talked it about as being infrastructure as code in the past, because they've generally written the code to create and build out or maintain infrastructure, servers, networks, things like that, okay? Now, the good thing with Terraform is we don't just have to do the creation, we can maintain things, okay? So we can make changes to this setup. So say, for example, a band is about to go live with their new tour, whoever your favorite is. We are expecting a load of traffic to hit the service. We might want to scale up those web servers in advance so we don't take the site down and we can actually handle that load and give the customers, the end users, a good experience, right? So I can adjust that variable and increase the size of my web servers. Hopefully that's changed. There we go. And actually scale up those web servers in advance of it happening. All right, so that's one way we can maybe handle it. We can then do that, reapply the Terraform, scale up the service. Alternatively, if we don't want to do it that way, it could maybe be that we don't scale up the size. Maybe we add an additional web server. So instead of having two that are handling the load, we split it 3 ways. So there are different ways we can kind of copy parts of the configuration, reuse it, and scale up if we needed to, and scale down. I'll be honest, there's ways AWS and other services can do that automatically for you, but just as an example. All right. Does anyone want to throw out a number out there? Like if I was to go and do this manually in the GUI, I went into AWS and started to do this, anyone want to throw out a number how long it might take me to manually configure one of those web servers?
3 days.
Did someone say 3 days? Yeah? I probably wouldn't go that far, but it could be a fair amount of time. By the time you've gone into the likes of AWS, gone into the EC2, which is the web servers, or the servers that you're going to spin up, choose it, wait for it to execute, then log into the actual server once it's up, install whatever your web tool is that you're going to use to serve it, like Apache, copy the content across. Easily, if I'm being very, very generous and being very quick, say an hour, right? I've got 3 servers there. If I'm scaling up quickly or trying to do this repeatedly for different customers, that's going to take me a long time. If I'm using a configuration within Terraform, I can tell Terraform to go and execute this and then do other stuff whilst it's actually running off and actually installing all the things that are needed. That can turn what is a very manual process, which, to be honest, I'm probably going to type something wrong, into a very automated, very scripted, kind of consistent approach that I can use for different use cases, okay? So why might I want to use Terraform? Now, we're not saying that you have to go and use Terraform. There are use cases that you might see you might want to use it for. There is a mixture of different people in the room here from organizations that do very different things. So for example, if you're out there offering professional services, reusable configurations. I talked about it, for example, that web server idea right now. I might have the same base configuration that I use for multiple customers. If I'm trying to achieve the same outcome for different people, I can copy that template, that configuration file, and use it for different people. Okay? I don't have to start from scratch every single time. So that's a really powerful, really quick way to do it. I can share it with colleagues who can go and do the same thing, or actually it might even be that I put something on GitHub that someone else finds useful and they can go and do it. They don't have to start from scratch themselves as well. It's like sharing a script. Now, what about if I do managed services, for example? I've got the same benefit there. I can still use the reusable configurations. I don't have to go and start from scratch. But there's a number of others, because you're managing that service continuously afterwards, that you might want to benefit from as well. So we've got the likes of GitOps. Have people heard of the term GitOps before? A couple of people. I can kind of see hands going up. So GitOps is kind of the opposite of what most of us are used to. So we would kind of refer to either ClickOps. I am going into the GUI, I'm manually selecting the options I want to do and then type out what it is. GitOps being the automated kind of version of this. So what we'd maybe do in this case, if you're a managed service, is you take that configuration, maybe put it into a repository like GitHub, for example. When I'm making a change, that would go into a separate branch, maybe a test branch or development branch. I could maybe request someone to do a peer review so they can look at the change that I'm making, make sure it makes sense, They approve it, so it's not just me pushing things to production. They approve it, it goes into the master, and then maybe Terraform automatically then applies that change into the environment. So we're getting a really kind of controlled way of actually maintaining the changes that we're doing in there, and they're in a central repository where everyone can see it. Okay? We've then got version control. So if we are using something like GitHub, we can see the changes that are happening. We've got all of the previous versions that are going back. So we can see the differences that have happened between them. But really usefully, if I've made a change and for some reason, even though it was approved and it looked okay, something went wrong, we can actually roll back to the previous version really, really quickly. For those of you who are familiar with Jamf, easy example, for example, would be a script. If I go into a script and make a change, remove a few lines of code, maybe add a different one in, it looked okay. I might have tested it, but maybe I did a typo when I did it in the GUI. I can then actually, if I'm using this approach, roll back to the previous version and immediately reapply it, and you'll see that the changes go straight back into the script. I don't need to remember exactly which lines were changed, which code bits were modified. I can have it automatically back and working within a couple of minutes. No more head scratching, no more panicking, someone in my ear going, what did you do? Okay. Audit logs. Well, because we're uploading it into a repository like this, we've requested a peer review. We're going to see who got the review, who approved it, when it moved into a branch kind of thing, and when it was actually applied. We've got a lot more kind of data points that we might need from a compliance perspective. And then the last one is configuration creep. If you're doing managed services, what some people do when they're managing a service is also give the customer some access or all access as well. And if you're worried about someone actually going and changing what you've pushed out already via your configuration, you can actually bring it back in line with what you're expecting. If they've modified something you've changed, we can reapply it over the top and go back to how you've declared it to be. All right? So that's kind of from a managed service perspective. Now, if you're a customer or someone who kind of uses these services yourself, you're doing this all internally, absolutely fine. You've got all the same benefits, right? If you wanted to, you can go down the same route as, say, a managed service provider. The other thing you might want to consider is the likes of going from a sandbox environment to production or vice versa. Hey, I'm doing the right testing. I've put it in the sandbox. I've created what it is that I want to push out. I want to now put it into production. Well, I don't need to go into the GUI in my production environment, start clicking through, do those typos. I can copy the part of the configuration I've added to my sandbox into my production configuration and then apply that. Okay? So a really quick way of moving things around between different environments as well. Hopefully I haven't lost anyone. Does that make sense as to why you might want to consider using it? Yeah, like I said, I'm not saying you have to use it, each to their own. So we'll talk a little bit about Terraform providers because they're really useful. Who are they? What are they? Where do I get them? Those kind of things. So a provider is basically a plugin for Terraform. They're either community developed. There are lots of different community ones out there where people work together, kind of open source it to actually do a task against a particular vendor. Or in some cases, there are vendor-developed plugins, and we've got a few of those as well. And the whole point of them is to manage the communication between your configuration, your code, and whatever that vendor is, whatever that environment is that you're trying to configure. Okay? And they do that by translating what we call HCL, which is HashiCorp configuration language, into that vendor's API requests. So going off and doing the automations for you. Okay? It will make sense in a second, I promise. I'm going to show you what it looks like. Okay? Don't get scared. Okay? We've already seen this. This is the same workflow we looked at a minute ago. Where does the provider sit within this? Well, they sit in that kind of Terraform layer there. We put the provider files in there. Okay? So we've got a couple we're going to kind of touch on. There's two as an example there, but they basically act as the translator, like I said. So they will translate our configuration into what the vendor's expecting to actually do any kind of creation or maintenance. All right? So this is an example of a Terraform resource. So this is written in that HashiCorp configuration language. It's basically a standardized format. So regardless of who the vendor is that you're using, i.e. the provider, you'll see a very similar structure. It's human readable, and it's very much the same. So if you're using kind of Jamf resources, it will have a similar structure to what you see in AWS. Obviously, the content of them is going to be slightly different, but the structure is the same. And if I break down that structure now, basically what we're doing to start with in our block is declaring that we're declaring a resource into our configuration. We want you to go and create or maintain something for me. And if I've said declare a few times, it's because Terraform is basically declarative. We're saying we want you to maintain the state of something. If it's not been created, go and create it. If it's been created but it's different from what I said it should be, go and modify it to make it whatever I've said it should be. If it's not there anymore, we're going to get rid of it. So Terraform is basically a declarative language and protocol that we're going to be using. And the first thing we're doing is saying, this is a resource that I want you to maintain for me. All right? The next thing we're going to do is actually tell it what it is we're expecting it to create and maintain for me. So in this case, a Jamf Pro Smart Computer Group. Okay? This is the type of resource now. And the next bit is a unique identifier. So this is solely within our code. This won't be seen in Jamf, in any of the Jamf environments. This is just how I can reference something or have something uniquely set within my configuration files. Okay? After that, everything within the curly braces below is basically the content that makes up that resource. So in this case, the name that will be displayed in Jamf, whether or not it's relating to a site or not, whatever the criteria is that makes it a smart group to determine my memberships. Okay? So this is what a resource looks like. Easy to read? Make some kind of sense? Yeah? Cool. So, at no point in that resource did I mention anything about doing a curl command, what the API endpoints I need to use, or anything like that was, right? That's the beauty of a provider file. I don't need to know. It's not the same as in a regular script. I've told it I want a smart computer group. It knows how to interact with the Jamf environment to go and do that for me. Because at the moment, for example, if you look at some of our API endpoints, there could potentially be 3 different ways I could create a smart group. We've got the classic API, with what we call the universal API, and currently at the moment we're into a beta of kind of the future of our APIs, which is platform APIs, which is kind of the last one on the screen there. I don't need to know that. So if you're not familiar with using API endpoints or curl commands, none of that was there. You don't have to. Now, where do I get the provider files from? You can get them from what we call the Terraform registry, and the link for it is just there, so registry.terraform.io. And below all those QR codes, there's basically 4 different providers that, if you're kind of using Jamf, that you might be interested in using. We've got the Jamf platform provider, so that is a Jamf developed one. You can see the Jamf Pro provider, so that's actually a community developed one from Deployment Theory, which we're actually going to use a little bit today, so you'll kind of see how that looks and how that works. And then we've got the macOS Security Portal and Security Cloud, depending on if you're using kind of Protect and some of the Connect functionality from the Jamf platform as well. So if you need the QR code, just take a picture of the whole screen. You've got them for later on if you need them. Okay? Structure. How am I writing this configuration? What does that actually look like? Okay? To be honest, there's no specifically right way to do this. There are some kind of minimal configs and some kind of recommended guidelines you might want to use when you first start out, just to give a bit of structure to what this looks like. And that's kind of what I'm going to cover now. So we've got a README file. You kind of go, why a README file? Well, I said these are reusable or shareable configurations. It might help to have a README file to explain what the point of the configuration is and what it does. So if you are sharing it or someone else in your team needs to refer to it, they can look at the README file and go, oh, this is going to do X, Y, or Z for me. Okay? We've got a main.tf file, so .tf, Terraform. All of the Terraform files will end in .tf. Kind of the entry point where we're going to actually start to declare all those resources, like what we just saw for the smart groups, where we're going to start putting the things we want maintained in our environment. We've got a variables file. Optional, depends whether or not your configuration uses variables or not, but it might be a good idea to separate those out, where we can kind of declare and maintain those separately. And then we've got an outputs file. We're not going to use that one today. But outputs could be used to actually write out things to the log afterwards. So say I've created a load of groups, I might want the IDs of those being written out to the log afterwards, as well as maybe a little description of what I'm actually putting into the logs as well, just so it's nice and clear as to what's going on there. And so really, we end up with kind of a very minimal config, 4 files. We don't necessarily need to use all of them, but it's kind of a good starting point. And this is the structure I'm going to use today. If we did get a bit more complicated and started going into a much bigger configuration with what we call modules. We're not going to do that today, so don't worry about that. We might look at something a bit more like this. You see, though, it's a very similar structure. We've got the same files. If we are doing modules, we might have a folder where all the modules live, but then each module's got the same structure. Hey, what is the point of that module? Let me look in the README file. What is declared in that module? I'll look in the main file for that module. Okay? So really, really straightforward for that. Terraform commands. Well, we can't run Terraform just yet because you're going to need to install it. That QR code will actually just take you to the Terraform webpage for the install instructions. There's a couple of ways you can do it on a Mac, but depending on the platforms you actually want to execute your Terraform on, you can find the rest on there as well. So we're just going to go through a handful of the most common commands and kind of the use cases, and then most of them is what you're going to see when I actually do it live in a few minutes as well anyway. So the first one, most useful one, if there's only one that you remember from today, remember this one, Terraform-help. It will tell you the use cases of all the other commands, the arguments and the parameters that you might be able to use, and the purpose of the other commands as well. So just remember Terraform-help, all right? Terraform init, so once we start to build our configuration, we need to initialize init, our working directory where our configuration is. It basically brings down the provider files. So any providers that we're going to use, it brings those down so that when we run the commands, it knows how to translate that into the requests we need to make against the environments. Terraform plan, hey, have a look at what I've declared in my environment and see kind of the current state of things, if I've deployed anything, and tell me what you're going to do next time I actually push out or apply my configuration. Show me what's going to happen, okay? So I can start to plan ahead as to what my deployment's looking like when I actually push it out. And kind of following on from that, the apply, hey, I'm ready to go live, or I've made a change and I want that to be reflected in whatever the environment is, let me do an apply. Destroy. I don't need this stuff anymore. Maybe I was testing something out in a sandbox or something else. I don't want any of the things that were configured. Tear it all down and start again. I'll do a destroy command. Validate kind of does what it says on the tin here. It's going to check my code. It's going to make sure it's valid and can actually be executed. So if I'm not sure or I've got an error when I run it, I can run a validate and maybe get some feedback as to what's wrong with my configuration. And I think this is the last one. FMT stands for format, just shorthand. If my code maybe isn't structured very well, still valid, could be executed. Maybe I've got some code from somewhere else, and it maybe isn't the easiest to read. I can run an FMT, a format command against it, and it will structure it, it'll indent it all nicely and make it a lot more readable for me to actually start using. And so basically, these are kind of probably the best ones for you to start with, but remember help, okay? Should we get building? Yeah? Okay, let's get this out of the way. So, hopefully this will look okay on the screen. If it's a bit small, shout and I'll try and make it bigger. But I have just got a blank Jamf environment here. I'm just using this to show you kind of, if I was using Terraform, how it would look in a Jamf way. But you can have other use cases for Terraform as well. So I've got a blank Jamf Pro tenant that's just been created. And what I have got is, let me just hide that for a second. I have got a template file here, which is exactly the structure I was just talking to you about in terms of files. So I'm just going to open my code editor and open up that directory. So if I go into here, so we can see down the side here, these are exactly the same files I was talking about before. So a README file, my main file, outputs and variables, okay? But I've got nothing in them, they're all completely empty. Now what we are going to do is we're going to jump into the Terraform registry. Is that okay? Towards the back, or do you need it a bit bigger? A little bit bigger. Better? Amazing. Cool. So we're on the Terraform registry. What I'm going to do is I'm going to search for Jamf Pro. And I mentioned it before, but we're going to use the community provider deployment theory one. So if I jump in here, we can see straight away, hey, yep, this was created by deployment theory. We can see all the versions that are here that have been released and when they were released. There's an example of how you might want to use this provider file. But actually, where we're going to spend most of our time for the registry is in the documentation. Because in here, we have got a whole list of all the different types of resources that we can create. But also really handily, just on the main page of the documentation, is a typical configuration, typical provider configuration that we can get started and actually start to use the provider. So it's got some variables in there. It tells the provider how to actually behave when we want to use it. And there's a really handy copy block. So I'm going to do that. I'm not typing this all out by hand. And so if I go back into my code editor and paste that example in, there's a few things that I'm going to need to set up in here in order to actually start interacting with my Jamf Pro. So I am going to go and set the URL of my tenant. So in this case, I've got a very handy one that I can't type called macad.jamfcloud.com. And it says, how do I want to authenticate? How am I going to start interacting with it? I'm going to be lazy today. I'm going to use basic auth. I know it's not the best, but I'm just going to use username and password. You can use OAuth and use API clients and secrets if you wanted to, but I'm just trying to do this quick and easy. And then it says, right, what's your username? So in this case, mine's Macad UK, and what's the password? Now, I've got this saved somewhere, so give me 1 second, because I'm not remembering this password. There we go. So I have got my configuration in there. I filled in the minimal variables that I need. Hey, where's the Jamf Pro environment I'm talking about, and how do I authenticate against it? What I'm actually going to do now is I'm going to jump into my terminal, which I should have here somewhere. And I'm going to go into that directory that we just created. And you can see there's those files that we were talking about. And I'm going to do a Terraform plan. What's going to happen now if I actually start to do anything? It actually comes up with an error. Okay, I'll be honest, it's expected. It's actually telling me really, really handily what the error is. There's no lock file, okay? But it does tell me how I can remediate that. It says, hey, it's because you haven't actually initialized your environment yet. What you need to do is go and do a Terraform init, initialize it, and get things working so that we can start to do other Terraform commands. So this is the first one we're going to have to do. So let's do a Terraform init. We can see here it's going off and finding the provider file. That might be a bit too big. I'll come out a little bit if I can. And it says it's been initialized, okay? So if we jump back into our code editor, can anyone notice any difference in our file structure? There's a couple of different things that are in here now. So we've got a .terraform folder, which if I go into it, has a changelog and a license and a README, all for the provider that I declared that I said I want to use for this configuration, okay? And here's the actual binary. The other thing it's created is that log file that it said that wasn't available when I tried to do the plan. Okay, it's created a log file for me. Now, the purpose of the log file is if I am sharing this configuration, it tells whoever else is running this the version, the provider, and the hashes of the binary that need to be used, so we can have a consistent kind of approach. So if I'm sharing it with a different team or just putting it online, people know which version of the provider my code is being run against. Okay? Can anyone notice anything interesting or funny about my provider right now compared to what we saw in the registry? Feel free to shout at me. What was the latest version? 37. Why am I on 18.1? Well, the reason why I'm on 18.1 is because when we copied that example, there is a version in here. And you're probably looking at it going, yeah, but it's got a greater than sign, so why isn't it doing greater than 18? It is, but the little tilde just before that basically says only move up the last point version. So I could go greater than 18, but I can only do 18.1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I cannot move to version 19 or above. Okay? So just be aware of that. If you do want to keep within a certain window, so hey, stay on 18, but I don't mind if it's a point change of that, but don't go any higher, you can add what we call a constraint here. So that's what we're doing, is we're constraining our version down and keeping it where it is. What I'm actually going to do is delete that. I don't want that. And if I go back into my terminal now and do a Terraform init upgrade, what's basically going to happen is because I've not specified a version, it's going to go off and bring down the latest version available to me. So now when I go back into that log file, we can see it's 37 and the hashes have changed, okay? So just be aware of that. If you want to lock it down, you can. If you don't want anything but the latest, just don't specify a version. But let's get cracking. We haven't got too much time. So if I go back into the registry, I'm going to search for a resource. I'm going to, not the most exciting example, but you'll see why I'm going to use this in a minute. I'm just going to get a Jamf Pro site. So there's some really, really good documentation from the deployment theory guys here. So we've got a really good example at the top here that I can copy and use, which is what I'm going to do. But then below that is the schema, which shows us all the required or optional values that I may want to use. So there might be something that's not in the example given that I want to go and manually customize it and do it my own way. I can do that. So let's copy that example and go back into our main file. I'm going to go and I'm actually going to create 2 sites. So I'm going to give the first one a unique identifier of the UK, and I'm going to give it a display name of what's going to show in Jamf of United Kingdom. And then my second one I'm going to call USA as the identifier. And I'll put United States of America. And we'll save that. So now I've actually got something declared. I actually wanted to do something for me. So if I do a Terraform plan now, like we tried earlier, it's actually going to work now. So it's going to go through and see what I've declared. Has it already started creating or maintaining things for me? And show me what it's actually going to do next time we actually run this through and actually apply it. So we'll give it a few moments. Here we go. So straight away it said, hey, the only thing I need to do is create some things. I'm going to create 2 different resources. This is the first one. This is the second one. So there's 2 things to add, no changes, nothing to destroy, okay? So I'm actually going to apply this now. I want to go ahead and do it. The first thing you'll notice when you do an apply is it does a plan again. It doesn't know that I just did it, okay? It could have been a day ago, a week ago, a month ago. It doesn't know. So it does a plan, and it's going to propose what the changes are to me and say, am I okay with going ahead with that? So we'll see in a second. We'll get the same kind of thing come back. Here we go. So we've got the same kind of plan structure again. Do you want to go ahead and execute these actions? Yes. And so now the provider is going to start translating those resource objects into the API commands and going off to the Jamf environment and creating them for me, okay? We'll give it a couple of seconds. You'll see kind of the actions start coming through in a moment and start showing what is actually created for me. So there we go. Creating a Jamf Pro site. There's 2 created. If I jump back across into what was a blank Jamf environment and refresh, straight away I've got my sites there. Okay? That's why I did sites. It's nice and quick and easy to show you. If I go back into my shell though, I said we were going to go through kind of those main commands that we looked at before. Maybe I don't need those sites anymore. I don't need anything in my configuration. I can go and do a destroy. So if I run it through, it will do a plan again and tell me, hey, I'm going to destroy X number of resources or objects that you've asked for. Show me, just like we saw for the application, for the apply, what those are, and then I can confirm whether or not I want to go ahead or not. So I'm going to do that really quickly. Here we go. Refreshing the state. It's just checking locally, hey, are these already created? Do I need to actually go and delete them? Or have they not been created yet? And then it's going to make that proposal to me. A couple of seconds. Here we go. So we're only going to do one thing. We're going to destroy. We're going to destroy these 2 things. Not adding, not changing anything, just destroying two resources. Is that okay? Yes. So I'll let that run through. Whilst that's actually going, purely because I'm just conscious of time, I'm going to grab a different resource. We're going to do something slightly different. So I'm going to grab a Jamf Pro account. And yet again, I said the documentation here is really, really good, really useful. There's a few examples at the top here. But there's a lot more you can do with an account than you can with a site. So you'll see the schema is a lot more detailed. There's a lot more optional items in here. So if I want to build one out, I can. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy out this bottom example. Pop it in. There you go. You can see those have been destroyed. And pop it into my configuration. But I'm actually just going to pop it just above the sites for a moment. Give it an identifier. So this is Donald Duck. That's right. He works for me now. Needs to be in my Jamf environment. Maybe give him a different email address. donald.d@disney.com. And it says site access. So does Donald belong to a particular site? In this case, yeah, he needs site access. Now, I could go into Jamf Pro, find out the ID of the groups that I had created. Oh, sorry, not the groups, the sites, find the ID number, put it in here, but it's not very dynamic. Now, the whole reason why we have those unique identifiers is we can refer to the resources that we're declaring in our configuration in the code. So I can say Jamf Pro _site, and you can see it's got .uk. So I'm going to say he's part of the UK site. If I do that, it's going to bring back all of the attributes about that, though. So I can actually go one step further and say, just return the ID number of that site against site_ID. Now, who here is comfortable with scripting and would normally do stuff like this in a script? Few hands. Okay, what do you think is going to happen if I run this now? Say that again. So the sites have just been destroyed already. Generally, if you did this in a script, I've put my account above the sites, but I'm saying I need the sites. If I was to do this in a script, that's not going to work because what I'm asking for doesn't exist yet. Now, the really nice thing, and you'll see it here, is when I'm doing this apply, and I gave it an extra flag, I said auto-approve. I don't want to wait for me to say yes. It's saying that I'm going to create some stuff. I'm going to create Donald Duck's account, and I'm going to create those sites. It's actually clever enough to turn around and go, I'm creating the sites first, and then I'm creating Donald's account. Okay? That's because the provider file knows that when it's creating an account, there's a possible prerequisite there of, hey, they might need site-level access. So I might need to go and create the sites first, and that's what it's done for me. So even though historically if you went into a script, it would work its way down from top to bottom, that's not the way a configuration file works in Terraform. So don't worry about having to make sure everything's in the right kind of order. The provider will actually help you out massively with that. And so now if I go back into Jamf Pro, refresh, my sites are there because they came back when I just created it again. But if I go into settings and go into accounts, Donald Duck is in here. Okay, and you can see he's got his accounts. He's automatically linked into site level access and the UK. So dynamically, we actually added that ID number across from the resources. Because Terraform is maintaining that resource for me, it knows the ID number of the UK site and automatically added it to the account for me. All right. Now, I've only got a couple of minutes, and so before James has a go at me, I can hear him laughing. I'm going to try and do one more. Let's do this really quickly. So Jamf Pro, we're going to do enrollment. So if I copy this example here, so this is effectively automated device enrollment in Jamf Pro. So if I wanted to configure that, I can. I'm going to pop down to the bottom here and put it in, and I'm going to call it, give it an identifier, MacAd, ABM, Rob's MacAd, ABM tenant. But you can see underneath it says, right, I need a token. I actually need a file that I'm going to upload, and that's the token you get from Apple Business, right? I haven't got that in here right now. What I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to create a folder where I can store things like that. I'm going to call it assets. Some people call it supporting files. Kind of up to you what that's going to be. So there's my directory. And I've actually got the token very handily here on my desktop ready for you guys. So let's copy that in. Oh, I can't copy today. For some reason, this does not want to click. Thanks. There we go. So I've got it. Now what I can also do is, now that it's in that folder in my configuration, is I can copy the relative path within my working directory with my configuration. And so when I go back to actually the resource that I'm declaring, I can go and delete everything that's here and just paste that in. And likewise, site. Hey, I might want to link this to a site. I'm going to do the USA one. So if we save that, we'll do a Terraform apply again. I'll auto-approve it, so it doesn't have to wait for me to say yes or anything like that. It's now going to go through, create that resource. It's going to prompt us and say, hey, there's only one thing to create now because we've already got the 3 existing resources, the 2 sites and the account. But now I'm going to upload that token and pop it into your Jamf Pro for you and assign it to the USA site that I've mentioned already and dynamically add that in. So you can see here, it's gone through, gone, look, a lot of this stuff I don't know right now because I've not uploaded the token. I don't know who the org is. I don't know the ID of the ABM tenant once it's been created. I'll know all that once I've actually uploaded it. So we'll get that information through afterwards. But you can see the site ID there. So my USA site in this tenant is actually ID 30. Yeah, again, dynamically assigned in there. And if I go into Jamf Pro really quickly, go back to my settings, and go to automated device enrollment, there's the tenant, and it's automatically linked to the USA. So you can apply that to other things as well. So if you want to do package uploads, there'll be a package resource that you can declare. You can maybe have the package files in a local repository or somewhere else that you're using to upload things like that as well. So it's not just sites. You can do policies. You can see how you can dynamically link a policy, a package ID, for example, into a policy if you're deploying things like that, or scripts, and how you can do all this automatically without needing to actually go and know the IDs of all these things. Really useful way of, hey, config profile, scope it out to this group, things like that. Make sense? Yeah? Cool. So I'm basically out of time, but we've covered what is Terraform, why it's called IAC, what's a provider file, why you might want to use it. Kind of a good starting point for your Terraform structure and the main commands you use, and hopefully seeing it in action has been useful, and you maybe have enough knowledge where you can go and start playing around yourself and start to experience it in your own environment. Maybe not a production environment, maybe go and practice in a sandbox or somewhere else first. Have I got time for any questions, James, wherever you are?
Do one.
Thanks.
All right at the front.
Oh, loads of questions.
Because I'm lazy. Do the one right at the front.
I can see the people at the front.
Thanks. So if you've got an existing Jamf tenant already and you want to start using Terraform management, is there an easy way to pull the existing config into your Terraform file so that you can then start making changes without wiping it from scratch?
Yes and no. So there's kind of two approaches that we're kind of looking at the moment. It's a funny one because obviously you need to have a certain amount of knowledge to understand and use Terraform once you've done that anyway. So there's kind of two things. One, we're looking at kind of PS work. If you don't necessarily have the knowledge and want some help, we can maybe look at what that would look like and do that for you. There is also something else that we're looking at. It's got a name at the moment. I don't know if that's the name it's going to stay with. I'm going to call it an accelerator. It's basically a tool where you can actually then go and run against your environment, against either Jamf Pro, Security Portal, Security Cloud, whatever it may be, and have it read all of the different resources that are in there and pull that down into a configuration file for you. And then it basically tells you what the next steps are. So it will turn around and say, cool, you've got it, go into that directory, plan that directory, so we can see the changes, make sure you're happy with what you're going to do, then apply it. When it does the apply it, it's going to run what we call some import commands, where it goes off to whichever Jamf environment it is, pulls down all the attributes that relate to whatever that resource was, and so then you now have a state file, which basically Terraform knows that it's in control of those resources, and then we get rid of the imports. So that is not available at the moment. I am one of a number of people internally who are testing it. I can't show it to everyone right now, but maybe come and grab me and I'll try and show a couple of people if I can what that looks like, because it's a very, very quick way and a very useful way of kind of getting from A to B if you are already in an existing tenant. Hopefully that answers the question. Yeah. Cool.
Again, thank you, Rob.
Thanks.